good suffering may even bring you to kind of hidden parts of yourself that are good, actually. You'll discover good parts of yourself through good suffering. That's what I'm saying. It'll bring you home. How do we know that we are doing the good suffering, or the bad suffering? How can we distinguish this? If we come back to the beautiful Robert Johnson, he reminds us that the word to suffer means to allow, right? And there's a lot of ways we could look at that. So we kind of allow the pain of the thing that happened, or the iniquity that we experienced, or whatever, the suffering involved. We allow the suffering, in a sense, but we also allow all the rest of the context, all the other things that were in the background, okay? And certainly we can allow the grace that can accompany the suffering. Now, the opposite of to allow is to resist, right? So we know we're not really suffering well when we resist all the contextual stuff. We're just pressing pause, We resist the stuff that's going to help us understand it better. And when we resist the grace that can accompany it, okay? So we know these by the energy in ourselves, right? Whether or not we are getting fixated on something, or whether we're kind of going, okay, I can kind of just be with that, Good suffering will help you ultimately come to terms with things. It will help you accept them. It will make you more compassionate. It will open your mind. It will resolve eventually. And good suffering may even bring you to kind of hidden parts of yourself that are good, actually. You'll discover good parts of yourself through good suffering. That's what I'm saying. It'll bring you home. Bad suffering is different, okay? It will do just the opposite. It'll leave you anxious. It will leave you upset. It will leave you ruminating. It might leave you a bit hopeless. It will leave you with a very shallow understanding of yourself, a very shallow understanding of others. And ultimately, if it goes on too long, can depress and deplete. Where are you doing this? I think we all do it sometimes. I think we can all kind of tip into this territory. I think these are the places where we almost kind of perversely console ourselves with the truth about ourselves, or the truth about others, okay? The truth about life, and we get stuck in places of self-recrimination, the blames, the shames, stale certainties, things we just know about ourselves, and things we just know about other people. It's shallow, there's no depth. You sense that there's no depth because it leaves you either feeling bitter, it leaves you feeling maybe depleted or fatigued, or sometimes it might leave you in that kind of realm of self-pity, Now, self-pity, I don't say that pejoratively. Self-pity is like poor man's grief, Many people will do pity rather than grief. Underneath that pity is always grief, something deeper. We're aiming for something deeper, And I think that's how we know if we're suffering well or not well. The most important thing is that we are utilizing any regret that we have to move away from seeing our lives as just a singular existence, which was good or bad, which we passed or failed, because our lives are so much more complex than this. Our lives bear witness to things that we don't even think about, right? Things that are much vaster than we can even possibly comprehend. You will sometimes hear one generation trying to speak to another generation. You will hear them kind of feebly trying to show the next generation what it was like for their generation. And they can't fully put that into words. That's just one of the things that our lives bear witness to, our generation. There are numerous things, culture, all these different things. And all of these affect decisions that we make and how we view ourselves, and the wonderful things that we do, as well as the regrets that we hold. What we're saying is we don't want to misunderstand ourselves or derive any shallow meanings about ourselves or our existence. Something we kind of rarely allow for ourselves is that at those points of adversity, the points at which all those bigger forces have put pressure on us, pressure on our tiny little egos, they've caused us pressure, whether that's family of origin pressure or generational pressure, whatever, financial pressure, stress, whatever it is. And usually a bunch of them, and sometimes we make a mistake, we make a poorer decision. And we bear the burden of that all in our tiny little egos. So all these big things have impacted us, but we bear the kind of the emotional and psychological and spiritual burden all by ourselves, alone. And one thing that goes on, I think, for people who've experienced a lot of adversity at different points is they almost lose the ability to tell you about all of that, to tell the story properly. They kind of just got through. I think that we are all a little bit familiar with that kind of just surviving piece, right? That kind of, let's call it maybe like the ugly survival, okay? Everybody has points where there's a little bit of an ugly survival. We just scrape through and we don't ever want to look back at it, And then when we have to look back in some of these later years, it's really hard. It hurts a little bit, There are painful pieces to this. Now, the thing that I want us to take away from this is there are beautiful things under the ugly survival, right? Also, what I want us to take away is survival is good. Don't ever let anybody tell you that survival is not good. Messy survival is better than not surviving, okay? Very, very important. And not only that, under the messy survival are beautiful things, but you have to do that work. Okay. If we are going to learn how to find the beautiful things that are underneath, or the important things, or the meaningful things that are underneath, we have to learn how to think about regrets in the correct way. So we're going to do a little bit of that together. I want us to do that together. So we can soften some of this experience. Sometimes when we contemplate regrets, it gets very harsh in the mind. It's like knots in the mind, the more you think about it, the more it tightens and tightens and tightens, and then you can't untangle it. And we have to work on softening it, loosening it up a little bit, okay? So we ask a few questions about a regret. So for a minute, you could probably take a moderate regret that you have, something moderate. Like on a scale of 1 to 10, I am thinking maybe, like a 5, okay? We don't want to do the 10s here, we want to do the 5s, right? To learn how to play with this. And we simply ask a few questions about this to sort of loosen it up a little, that tight thinking, right? The first thing I want you to ask yourself is, okay, is this regret, if I'm over-focused on it, is it hurting me in any way, right? How is it hurting me? Is this getting in your way? What's it doing? Does it make you feel less confident? Is it making you feel guilty? Is it making you feel like things are futile? Is it making you more angry or resentful? Okay, really kind of way up there. What's it doing to you? What's the impact that it's having on you? Is it leaving you a bit stuck in your growth, your development, your acceptance? Okay, put your language on it. Okay, and then we would objectively kind of say, right, well, this probably isn't good for you. This isn't where you want to be going. This is not where you want to be kind of heading, right? Now, you can go back a bit and you can think about this kind of regret and try to contextualize it a little bit more. So you can think about things like, okay, well, if this was something that happened or something that you did or a mistake that you made or a choice that was poor, let's say, well, what age were you? Okay, were you younger than you are now? Were there things you didn't know then? Were there things that you maybe didn't understand at the time? Were there inner challenges inside that you were negotiating? Were there outer challenges? Were there stresses? What were you contending with at the time when this occurred? Okay? Were there possibly resources that you didn't have that you needed, maybe that you have now? You have to bear in mind, if you're looking back at this, you're looking back from usually a very different vantage point. And you mightn't have access to some of the inner or outer resources then that you do now, right? What were the things that maybe you know now, but possibly you just didn't know then, okay? And can you allow for that? Can you allow that to be, What were some of the pressures? Some of the cultural pressures, some of the generational pressures, some of the family of origin pressures that influence this, okay? How much of this situation was actually beyond your control, all right? There were probably pieces to this puzzle that were well out of your control, okay? What were those? Now, another thing we can think of is, has anybody else in the world ever made this mistake? Has anybody else in the world ever made this poor decision? Are there other people who have erred in this way, the same as you? Okay, sometimes maybe even worse, right? Now, how would you approach that person? What would you say to them? What consolation would you offer them? You know, how would you interpret this to them? What would you offer a stranger that you don't offer yourself for some strange reason? We need to think about that. Okay. Another thing we can think about is, in the midst of this difficult period where this regret occurred, was there anything that you did right? Did you do anything right within that? Was there anything that you tried to do right? Maybe it didn't work out, but that you tried. Were there any pieces to this that perhaps you did well in the midst of that? Okay, and can you learn to think like this? Can you accept all of these things? Can you accept the feelings that come with the regret? But can you also accept the context? Can you work through the context? And can you allow yourself that? What I really want us to understand is that in our minds, the way that we speak to ourselves around regret, the way that we ruminate, the way that we think about it, the way that we press pause, tightens that knot, makes it tighter and tighter and tighter, and it hurts. That makes it harder to loosen it up. So we have to work on how we think about these things. And we do that by contextualizing it. It's very, very important. Okay. The other way in which we loosen that knot, if you want, is, this is a bit like when we ask ourselves these questions, we are loosening it up with our minds. We also have to loosen it up with our hearts. So we have to work on things like forgiveness. We have to work on things like compassion. Very important work occurs when someone of one age, right, let's say 55, 65, whatever, looks back in time to a part of themselves that was younger, we could say 25, 30, and when they do that, they can almost kind of retroactively console themselves. They can almost retroactively understand themselves a little bit better. They can retroactively support themselves. Now, I understand that this is not changing the linear time that we're talking about, but it is changing that ageless self, okay? So when one part of us from a different vantage point can look back at another part of us and say, it's okay, or I accept you, or I forgive you, or I am going to make sure that you have what you need. Whatever the consoling thing that that person needed to hear at that point in order to do better or do something different, we can offer that now. And that is psychological gold, okay? Really important work that we do when we are able to do that.